Okay, now we're recorded. Okay, let me start out by giving you just a few little sort of logistical updates. And, but one other time, let me just go through the roll call here. I have Dan and Holly from the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, yep. Carmen, Jamila, and Martha from Free Library, or DC Public Library.
Yes.
Lisa from Free Library Philadelphia.
Yep.
Deirdre and Barbara from Greenwich.
Yes.
Kim from Library of Virginia.
Yes.
And Gina, Christine, and Isaac from Saratoga Springs.
Yes.
And is there anybody else? Okay. So just a reminder, the purpose of these calls is really for open space and to ask questions and learn from each other. If something comes up that's really specific to your library, I sent an email out, I think, to everybody, so you have my email address, and just feel free to shoot me an email if something comes specific to your situation. But this is really a group learning space right here. I want to give you an update on ALA Connect. That's going to be the forum really where recordings are archived, where documents can be shared, where we're going to be doing a webinar next week where you'll be able to get access to the PowerPoints and the webinar content after the webinar. The ALA Connect should be set up by next Tuesday, January 21st, and all of the lab participants are going to be receiving an invitation from Connect. And it's a closed group, which is meaning really that it's only for the participants to post to it. Yeah. And but we will be archiving the coaching calls there and making them available to all of you so you can listen back if you wish. And
Carlton,
participants, yes.
I just wanted to ask, will that be true even for people who are not ALA members?
I'll have to check on that. So let me find that. Let me get an answer to that and get back, okay?
Thanks.
Make a note of that. But also I wanted to let you know that participants will be able to post documents to the group as well as updates and other links. So this is like a sharing portal that we'll be using. And then just related to that, ALA is working on building out an area of their website, ALA, the Libraries Transform Communities website, that will have information on this group and other groups that are working with this. Next week, the 21st, we have a webinar on hosting and leading community conversations. And that's going to, I would really strongly encourage you to join in with that. I might ask Dan if you wouldn't mind to share briefly with the people in a minute sort of what you're doing with that and sort of how you thought about it after you received from me what you did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hate to put a damper on the agenda, but we actually postponed it for other reasons.
Okay, that's fine. No, that's perfectly fine. Just to refresh people's memory, though, and I don't want to go too much into this, but on the last call, Dan was sharing about how he was going to be doing, they had some community conversations set up, but we hadn't had the conversation training yet. And what I'm referencing is we have a community conversation workbook that's 24 pages long that you'll all be receiving, and there's a webinar that accompanies that. In your lab notebook, you might recall there was one page that had the 10 questions of community conversations. And so there's a lot more to go with it. And, well, I don't know, maybe take a break right now. Dan, why don't you share with them what you were thinking when you saw the material that I sent you?
Sure. I'm going to move a little closer to the phone. This is my impression of the material that you sent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a relief because my intention originally had been to just try to sort of like channel what I had seen other people do and go through the motions, but it is a very, there's a very clear-cut sort of set of instructions and outcomes and things like that. So it does really tell you everything you need to know to do them, including the sort of logistical things like set expectations, what kind of place you should do the conversations and things like that. So it was a relief.
Yeah, I would just encourage people to join in on the webinar because what in essence you're going to be experiencing is you've had a taste of the aspirations exercise, which is in essence 3 or 4 questions. You did that at the lab. Many of you talked about doing that back in your libraries going home. I think, Isaac, last time you mentioned something about does it go deeper or is there more? And the community conversations is where it goes deeper and there's more, but there's also a bit more to it than just asking 10 questions. And we're going to be getting into that. You'll be getting a workbook. That workbook is being re-edited and fixed up to be co-branded between ALA and Harwood now, and you'll have that before the webinar to be looking at. So that's on the 21st. And then we'll be archiving that as well.
Carlton, this is Holly in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Will that webinar then be archived? Because both Dan and I have conflicts with that.
Yeah, the webinar will be archived. Yes. But still, there's an opportunity in webinars to ask questions and to engage in some discussion. And in the archive format, of course, you're not going to have that. So
right.
it'd be preferable if you can actually join in on it.
Right.
I think that's the logistics. Let me flip this over now to basically an open space for you, unless you have any specific logistical questions. I'm just interested in having everybody, talk a little bit about what have they been doing since our December call with what you learned at the lab. What's your experience been? What questions have raised for you?
I went on vacation.
Anybody have anything?
This is Kim
Anybody
from
have anything
Virginia.
they want to share? Go ahead.
Since we last talked, I have gotten together with a local library director, and she has put out an RFP to do neighborhood assessments for evaluating future public library needs. And one of the components.
Who is this?
This is Kim from Virginia.
Ah, okay.
And one of the components from the RFP is to develop discussion questions and lead discussions at neighborhood meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So she's talking about 9 meetings from February through October, and that is something that I will be doing for them. I was really intrigued when you mentioned all the community conversations materials that have yet to come, because I would really, really like to get my hands on those before February so that I can have a little bit fuller tool for doing these discussions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you all have any tips for doing this type of thing, I would love to hear it.
Well, the webinar is next Tuesday, I believe. Let me look at my calendar here. It's next, yeah, it's next Tuesday afternoon, the 21st.
And that will be accessible from your website, or?
Well, that's excellent. Thank you so much. I forgot to mention that. You're going to be receiving instructions for logging on to the webinar. All of you will be. We're going to be using GoToWebinar, and the instructions are going to be accompanying an invitation that you're going to be receiving from the GoToWebinar. So you'll get that before the 21st.
Okay, and
so
the notebook you were talking about,
you'll receive that as well.
Okay.
Is that an electronic version or paper that you're sending?
It's going to be probably in a PDF file.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would set aside 1 o'clock Tuesday, January 21st, and you'll be receiving an invitation to the webinar. But if you could take, it's going to be about an hour and a half. And the webinar is actually going to be presented by Cheryl Gorman, who you met in D.C. And it's how to convene and conduct community conversations. So that might be helpful to you, Kim, as you think about this RFIP and this library that's wanting to do community meetings.
Sure.
Yeah. Other things that people have been doing with what they learned since the lab, and what's your experience been? What ideas has it raised for you?
Well, this is Carmen from DC Public Library, and right before I went on break, I want to say maybe it was in late November, I did the aspiration exercise with children's librarians, and got a lot of valuable information that I need to pull together, but it was good that I also to have someone so I could facilitate, because it was a large group. It was about at least 35 folks that could help write things up while I give people suggestions and kind of pinpoint them to the question that I wanted them to respond to, as opposed to getting beyond it.
So you did the aspirations exercise with 35 children's librarians?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yep, and Martha you were there for part of it, right,
Yep.
Martha?
Yep.
So I'm curious, how did you find the experience? Just because 35 is a pretty good number of people. And,
Yeah, it was. I think one of the reasons I'm comfortable with this group, so it was easy. I think what I had to get them to focus back on sometimes, a couple times just to get them to focus back on the particular, to follow the structure. Sometimes they were jumping ahead with questions. So, but I think it went. My feeling is it worked pretty well, and we have so many things coming up, but I do want to come back with it, and maybe a good time we have one of our directors coming, and it may be something she wants to expand on a little bit more to kind of continue the conversation. So that may be an idea to to maybe share it with her, and then she may have questions she wants to ask people about it.
Anybody have any questions for Carmen about that?
And the one thing is they started off pretty immediately thinking not about themselves, but the community they serve. So it wasn't it wasn't in the sense of their aspirations, but their aspirations for the community, the library that they're serving, if you understand what I mean.
So how did you define community for that conversation?
I didn't define it, but they immediately went there.
Okay.
Wouldn't you say that, Martha?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I was really impressed with how quickly they caught on. Like, they just right away caught on and went with it. They're unlike all of us in the training who were like, well, what's community? They just they assumed a common, and there might have been one or two people who looked at community slightly differently, but for the most part, they were looking at their own neighborhood location and the customers they serve as their community.
So I'm curious, what did you learn from the conversation? What was your takeaway?
For me, I learned, which it wasn't something I learned, it just confirmed for me that they are very committed and thoughtful about how the work that they do with their community, and realize that's their goal is to make sure that they are like high-quality services and programs for children and the people who work with them. And so even when it sometimes got into situations or about the place, it was all in relation to how that affects the children that they serve.
Mm-hmm. So what did the aspirations exercise, doing it with them, sort of set up that allowed you to, is there anything set up that allowed you to do something
It
else?
set up some things that I think are important for them. Let me, I think they're interested in like more consistency in like policies,
Mm-hmm.
like I guess that is the same for everyone across the board. That is not different from one library to the next. I think also the connection to schools is something that was of importance to them.
Could you say a little more about that?
Well, I think, and that's something that we're working on, and I think as we do work, and if this would be an good exercise to do with one of the organizations that we're trying to build in a relationship with. Right now, because of the situation in D.C. of, I would say policy-wise, the structure of the school systems, you have the public schools and the charter schools, and the superintendent reports to a different person, and then there's an office of state superintendent that does different things. So it's not this clear, how would I say it, structural change, chain of, not command is what I'm looking for, but the structure of how the system operates is not the clearest. Wouldn't you say that, Martha? At least for me.
Yeah, and what happens is there's like not a one-stop shopping for reaching out to the schools. It's very, piecemeal, which is not efficient.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm wondering, does anybody have any questions about, for Martha or Carmen, about the aspiration exercise being used with 35 people of children's librarians, that particular approach and use of it? Does that spark any ideas or questions for people? Was there anything that you encountered in doing that raised questions for you?
No, it wasn't anything very surprising. In a lot of instances, they were confirming or expanding on aspirations of, other librarians. So, or, making it clear by saying, I agree with this and this is why, type of thing. I think one thing, go ahead.
So you found a lot of commonality between them.
Yes, yes.
Other ideas or thoughts, other experiences people have had since the last call?
Hi, this is Jamila from DC, and I also led aspirations with teen services staff. So it's a similar structure to Carmen's, except it's staff who primarily serve teens in DC Public Library. And so I changed the questions slightly and added teens. So the question I gave them was my aspirations for the teens in my library's community.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I changed it slightly.
Mm-hmm.
And we Went through all three. It was a very positive experience. No one had any questions or concerns about the process. I took a lot of notes, and common themes were hoping that teens have more access to opportunities, safe environments, are able to develop values, positive values. There was a lot of talk about how staff and adults work with young people and concerns about the disconnect between adults and youth.
Mm-hmm.
But the group was really focused on the activity, and I think the data that I gathered will be great as we move forward as a body and as a system, particularly as we look more towards, a new mission or new guidelines with our new director on board.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, your teen conversation was with teen librarians, is that correct?
Yes, and other staff who serve teens, so also library associates and library technicians, so, but public service in general, so it's a combination of librarians, library associates, and library technicians who serve teens or do teen programming. Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, you're hearing staff talking about more opportunities and safe environment and developing, how staff and adults work together with teens. I'm just curious if you're thinking of convening any groups of teens and doing a similar thing and seeing what they have to say.
It's possible. I lead our teen employment program, and I do workforce development trainings with them monthly, so I definitely have an audience for it in terms of teen employees, and then several libraries have tags, so it is possible.
Mm-hmm. You might find it interesting to do a conversation with teens and then theme what you heard from the librarians and the staff against what the teens are actually saying.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Other ideas or thoughts, other experiences people have had in the last month?
One comment I can make for, I think, Jamila and me, because our groups meet consistently, at least once a month, I think in doing this exercise, they felt comfortable immediately sharing among each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that, I think that's what made it easier for me, too, if a large group, even though there were some new librarians, it was a group that's familiar meeting at least together once a month.
Mm-hmm. So you already have a group that's consistently meeting that has a sense of what it's like to work together already.
Yes.
Right. So that sort of raises actually an issue that folks might think about in terms of, we're going to be getting into this in the community conversation webinar, but when you're inviting people together for a conversation that don't meet regularly, there's some different dynamics that come into play. And I'm just curious if anybody has had an opportunity to do either an aspirations exercise or ask questions with people that you don't know. Has anybody done that since over the course of the last month? I think somebody referenced it on the last call, having done some things in the lobbies, actually, of the library.
Saratoga Springs, Carlton, we did, since we last talked, we finished doing the aspirations exercise with all of our departments. We did it in department meetings, and since then we have assigned every person who works at the library to go do the ask exercise with someone in the community, and we're just starting to, and some people have chosen to do it. Chris is sitting here, she's done it with strangers in the corridors and that sort of thing, so she's really comfortable doing that. But we've told some of the staff who don't even necessarily regularly interact with the public as part of their daily work that they could do it with whomever they felt comfortable doing it with, but that everybody should do that exercise with someone just to make sure it's set the tone for being outwardly focused.
So you've done the aspirations exercise with all the departments?
We have, yes. Yep.
That's pretty impressive. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience was like and what did you learn from it?
I think we learned, we're still feeling our way, but we each took turns facilitating note-taking between Chris and Gina and me, and we took turns, and I think and we tried to keep the focus on the community that we serve, but we tried to keep the focus on the community and not at all on what the library did or how the library responds at this stage to the community needs. But we found that there were a lot of commonalities between issues, no matter which department we were talking with. There were differences in the way that the messages were delivered, the way people talked about the issues, but I think the issues at their heart were pretty much the same universally.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious on you say you're still feeling your way, and I'm thinking about doing this with all your department and taking turns. How are you feeling about it in terms of confidence in using these tools?
I think that, this is Chris, I think we're really comfortable doing this, and as Ike said, the similarities in, we wrote on the pad and, ideas that people threw out, and you could just look at them across the department meetings, and the operations staff really had a lot of the same ideas as the reference librarians. I mean, it was kind of stunning. People really put their finger on the main issues in the community.
Mm.
Some a little more gruffly than others.
Yeah. So I'm curious then, having learned that from those conversations, what have you done with it? How has that caused, what does that set you up to do differently?
So far, it hasn't really set us up to do anything. We're still kind of looking at this like we're in the intelligence gathering phase to see, because we're really looking at gathering this kind of input as a kind of a stepping stone to the community conversations. And honestly, we're anticipating getting a lot of the same responses from larger gatherings that we're getting from individuals. And I think that was alluded to in our training that, I think Carolyn said that, was it Carolyn? Somebody said that we'll probably get about 80% of the information from these aspirations exercises that we'll get from a community conversation. We'll get the same response. Then I think our next step will be developing a strategy for how to use the information, and I guess that's where the innovation spaces will come in when we reconvene people. And I'm sort of
Go ahead.
No.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say when we reconvene people, I'm sort of anticipating that we'll probably do it. We'll open the doors to whoever wants to come rather than trying to do it again at department meetings just to see, because there will be some people who are very interested in seeing how we can use the information, and other people to whom it honestly won't really matter all that much.
So let me sort of tee off a couple things you just said. One of them is about the information that you get from an aspirations exercise or the information you get from the community conversation. The community conversation normally takes at least an hour and a half. You're going to end up in an aspirations exercise you can do in quite a bit less time than that. I would say, generally speaking, the information you get out of the community conversation is going to be substantially more in-depth. You're going to get a lot more to chew on that you can reflect on in terms of what it means and how you can use it than you're going to get in an aspirations exercise. There's certain themes that will cross both of them, certainly, but you'll get a lot more content to work with. And we'll be talking about what that content is next week on the webinar. The other thing that you mentioned was about innovation space, and as a place to talk a little bit more about what you've learned and the implications. And I'm just curious, has anybody started to use Innovation Space yet? So I'll take that as a no, but let me encourage you that whether it's in DC or, whether it's in, Saratoga or wherever, that if you've had multiple people involved in doing these exercises, you're going to accelerate your learning and the implications from what you've learned if you take time to get together and do an innovation space. It's an hour of time to talk about simply what you've learned and the implications of what you've learned. And that tool is in the lab binder. And it's one of the things that I've found is most valuable to get started as soon as you can. Because that's really where you start to harvest what you've learned and how you can, and you start thinking about how you can use it. So I'll sort of put an underline on that. And it's really, if anybody has the opportunity where they've used these and there's somebody else that they work with and use them, if you can create a space to get together and simply talk about your experience and what you've learned, you'll learn a lot in a 45-minute period of reflection, and then 15 minutes really sort of what are the implications and who else needs to know from what you've learned. That make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else? Other things that people have been doing? I know we've been on a sort of a Christmas and New Year's break, and the weather in this part of the northeast part of the country has been awful, as it has been in Ohio, where I'm at. But other things that people have been doing, experiences they've had they want to talk about.
This is Holly in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a couple things. One is that with a group that we're trying to form around programming, I got them together and we did the self-assessment questions for the 3 A's of public life. And I thought that was a nice way to kind of start us off in that, were we all on the same page where we thought we were, and that we still had some room to grow. And people seemed to respond pretty well to it, and there was a lot of discussion that came out of that. So I thought that was pretty successful. And then
tell us a little bit about the group that you used that with again.
So this is a group that we don't have an adult programming coordinator for the system, and we're forming sort of what will probably end up being a community of practice around programming. And so this was just an initial meeting of a number of people who do programming or are interested in it, and to kind of set them back to the topic of, why adult programming was sort of the frame that I was starting with, like why does it even happen? And so we did some other things in that too. But one of the things I had with that group, so that would be people that work in branches in the neighborhood libraries, some people that work at Maine. It could be people that work in some of the support departments that support programming, like our marketing and creative services department. And so then it was that group looking at how they would assess, how we do on these things. And it was interesting. I mean, it was kind of where I would have probably assessed us as well. It was pretty similar, not always exact, but just going through and, I thought it was a nice exercise to start off turning outward in even our discussions, because it's very easy for people to start from the like, oh, we don't have this process or this policy, or how are we going to do this? And I wanted to kind of start us from a different point. So that was a nice way to do that, I thought. And then another thing that I was able to do is I got to spend an hour with a group of public librarians and children's librarians that work throughout the county that were in a day-long workshop there were a lot of different presentations and things, and I spent the morning with them, and I was connecting with the whole, again, this concept of why. So I did the aspirations with them, and what we talked about out of that was the things that we have in common, because the whole theme of this, the whole theme of the conference was actually how they're all of our kids and what we have in common. And one of the things that really came out of it is that, you know, the similarities, even though we might have different internal pressures, you know, at the public library from the school library. And we also talked about how it would be good to do this potential exercise with potential partners, because you could, again, then, because especially the school librarians were talking a lot about how they felt a real dissonance between themselves and sometimes other teachers or administration and then the parents. And so we were talking about how, starting from that common ground about what we want for our kids, and what, you know, that our aspirations for the kids in our community, that kind of starts you off at a different level and maybe helps you move through some of the things that, you know, are keeping us apart, and also help to identify good partnerships and move ground. And just the discussion that people got really into it. I mean, we probably could have had it for another 3 hours when people broke up in small groups and talked about it. And there was just a lot of energy that felt like it came out of it. And that was a really positive thing, where I felt like that's a nice ground that you could then do a lot of other work out of.
So well, first, does anybody have any questions for Holly? Any questions sparked for Holly from what she just said?
No.
No. So one of the things that I want to point out, you mentioned the idea of that this might be a good exercise to do with partners.
Yes.
And one of the things, just to let you know, we're going to be doing a webinar. I'm not sure of the date of it at this point, but we're going to be doing a webinar on partners and how to use these exercises with partners. And your instincts, Holly, for using aspirations with partners is dead on. It's the sense there is getting an understanding of does the partners that you're working with, do they share your aspirations?
Great.
And are they willing to run with you in the same way of what you're trying to get done? It becomes a critically important issue for effective partnerships. So, I mean, I'm glad you raised that. It's excellent instincts. We're actually going to be doing probably an hour to an hour and a half webinar on that topic this year.
Great.
Okay. The other thing I'm just thinking about is these are all different types of librarians, if I understood correctly. Is that right?
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
No, you speak.
No, go ahead. That's fine. Yes, that's right.
I was just going to say, bringing different types of librarians together to do the aspirations exercise and having a realization that they're all your children you're working with. Did this set you up for being able to do something different?
Well, in these two cases, I mean, the one was really more of a, like I said, it was more of a conference, so they were there as a learning exercise. And I use this as part of an example, again, of like, it was kind of a turning outward. I mean, I did a whole thing about really the why of what we do and starting with that, because I just so often feel like people aren't starting with that. They're starting with the what's and the how's. And we get bogged down in that, and so it's sort of an inspirational piece to kind of free us up to maybe have some of that, you know, give us room to be innovative and other things that we've talked about. So that was more of what that was where we were coming from there. I just really wanted to move people to a different place, and then I thought we could move from there. I wasn't working with the children's librarians beyond that. Now with the group of the other programming group, I definitely think that using this with the assessment and then continue to do some of these other pieces with them is going to be critical to keep them focused on those starting points as the community and turned outward. because I do think that that's a real issue, and I think we'll have a better product in the end if we start there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds like a great experience.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So I'm curious, as long as we're talking about Pittsburgh here, Dan, you said that you had some conversations, they had to be delayed. Are you still getting them set up and planning on doing those?
Yeah, we're working on it. I don't know if anybody else had this conflict, but we're seeing another community. We're not cheating on Harwood, but we have another community engagement person who we work with. So we're still figuring out how this fits into our overall strategy for getting community knowledge. So that's sort of been the sticking point so far. But I mean, it all seems to dovetail really nicely. So it's still the intention to use this process, and definitely this is a nice sort of lab environment for us to try out the specific project I'm talking about. So it might be better because we can now sort of follow the schedule that you had in mind as being optimal for learning, rather than a sort of red alert schedule that we thought we were on.
Okay. Yeah, so you'll be able to get a little bit more training and to step into it, except not so quite premature, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah. Other things that people have been doing, learning, questions that you have? This space is really yours to just ask questions and learn from each other.
This is Chris at the Saratoga Springs Library. I'm wondering about, we've got all these tools, but it's not always clear what's the best order. Are you suggesting the order of the webinar is the best order for us to use the tools, because we're, having different tools at different points in the conversations?
I didn't hear all of that precisely. You were talking about that you had all these different tools and you're wondering about the order to use them in?
Yes, I mean, I hear people, using the aspiration exercise, people using lots of different tools other than that also, and I don't know if you have suggestions for us what's the best way to do this.
Well, one of the things that I'd offer you to think about is, just as you heard people talk about today, Holly used the 3 A's as a self-assessment so that they would start a conversation with a group of people in a different way. They used, for aspirations exercise with teens and with children's librarians in D.C., and tried to sort of, for a different purpose and starting a conversation in a different way, but was exposing them to the idea of aspirations and talking about shared aspirations. Kim in Virginia was talking about an RFP. A person is having 9 meetings they want to incorporate into an RFP, and maybe community conversations could be used for that purpose. And the point I'm trying to make is that the different tools can be used for different strategic purposes. So one of the things to think about is, what is the situation that you're facing? What are you trying to get done? And then what tool is going to work for that purpose? Don't necessarily think of them as sequential. This one comes first, this one comes next, this one comes following that. You can use an ask exercise. Like in Saratoga, they were talking about having each staff member do that with somebody. An ask exercise is really more about giving people the confidence that they can engage people they don't know in a conversation, and it doesn't need to be scary. You might remember that from the lab in October, where some people went out on the street and talked to people they didn't know, and it was actually okay to do it. But some people are nervous about doing that. So an ask exercise might be used for that. And aspirations is an easy sort of entry point into how to sort of engage people in a different kind of conversation that's relatively easy. There's only 3 or 4 questions. A community conversation is going to allow you to go much deeper, get a lot more content that you can use that in terms of informing judgments and decisions about strategies and choices that you're making. But it also takes longer. It takes like an hour and a half to do a community conversation. So don't think about them so much as sequentially as think about them as they have strategic purposes. And I would encourage you, as you share amongst your group, think a little bit about what you're hearing from other libraries in terms of how they've used the tools, and then how can you apply them in different ways in your own setting. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I was thinking that, you know, if we were going to do community conversations, it'd be better to have the webinar, and if there are further webinars on other tools, it'd be better to wait until we have the webinar before we do them. But
well,
I guess
we're going to have, I'll be real sort of directive here. What I'm going to be asking people to do is, next Tuesday is the webinar on community conversations. And I'm going to be really strongly encouraging people to find an opportunity to actually do a community conversation. It might be with a community group. It might be with a group of people in the library. Each of your contexts are different. Each of your confidence in working with people is going to be different. But the key with community conversations is to just do it, like Nike says. Just do it. We're going to be talking about that you really need to have probably 8 to 15 people to get started. Going to take, like I said, an hour and a half. And it's probably not too early now to be thinking about, well, who can we have an hour and a half conversation with? Because what you're going to want to do is to try it out, get some repetition so you gain some confidence. And then as you're doing it and gaining your confidence in doing it, at the same time, you're going to be learning more stuff that you're going to want to bring into an innovation space. And then you're going to be learning from that. The question then becomes, how are you applying what you're learning, which gets back to the intentionality test. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not, if there's anything I would leave the call with today, and don't have to leave yet, but it's really be thinking about who can I have one of these deeper conversations with. And when we have a call, and then in February, we should actually have quite a bit to talk about if several people have had those conversations, because quite typically you get tangibly different information than you get out of an aspirations exercise. Has this sparked any questions or ideas for people? Any thoughts?
No, well, it's good to know that we'll have webinars to help reinforce the information that was learned back in October.
Yes, we'll be doing a webinar on applying what you know, what you've learned from community conversations. There will be a webinar on that. So you'll have the one on doing community conversations and hosting them. There will also be a webinar on basically how do you pull out of those conversations information that you need to be able to take action on. And we're going to be having a webinar, as I said, on partnering. There's going to be a series of webinars over the current year. But the other thing I would strongly encourage is go to the lab notebook, find the innovation space. You know, in the case where you've got 2 or 3 people that are using this together, make time to take an hour out and do that innovation space. And think a little bit about who else needs to be in that innovation space with you. There's some tips about that in the lab notebook, and you know, we could talk about that as well. Other ideas or things that have come up for people in the last month? Anything else anybody has at this point? I don't
No.
want to keep people for an hour and a half if
Right.
you don't need an hour and a half, but I want to
Yeah.
give you as much time as you need. So, and like I said, if there is something specific to your library that you don't think is really pertinent for this shared space, just shoot me an email. And we can either find time to talk, or we can exchange thoughts over an email. And everybody's got my email address by now, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. So, anything else from anybody? Nope.
Nope.
Okay. So, at any rate, please mark your calendars for the 21st, next Tuesday, 1 o'clock, and we'll be sending out information for the it's going to be a GoToWebinar, and you'll be receiving an email on that. And I should be receiving it as well, and we'll be kind of bird dogging to make sure you get it in plenty of time. And then the ALA Connect, as I said, you should be getting an email for that, for being a shared space that people can put things virtually, and you'll have the webinars, and you'll have the recordings of these calls. And let me see, I think I'll check in on the question, Isaac, that you had about if you're not ALA members, is that still relevant? And I'll let you know. And I think with that, unless anybody else has anything they want to bring up, I guess we're going to be done with this call. Okay?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And mark
Bye-bye, thanks.
mark your calendars for February 11th. Thanks.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.